We're here again for the Haftarah Halfhour. Joining us, as always, is Rabbi Joshua Neely. Welcome back.
It's good to be back.
So we've finished with Bereshit, we've finished with Genesis. We're now in Shemot. That's the book of Exodus, if you read it in English, although Shemot means names, doesn't it? Which kind of funny how sometimes the Hebrew and the English, the English should do a kind of decent job, but then sometimes it'll be something completely different.
Well, you'll actually see this on all the different books of the Torah. Is their English names will often reflect a description of the content in a way, usually which is connected to a Hebrew teaching as well. But the Hebrew name is usually the first significant word of the book itself. In the ancient times, I have to say that our ancestors were not creative in naming the books. They were referencing which book they were talking about, and the best way to let someone know which book you're talking about is say, no, the one that starts, and then you give the first couple words, and people go, oh yeah, that one, and then you're off and running. So
people had a much better understanding, I think, of the content of.
Well, memories were far superior in those days. Yes.
I know I rely too much on chapter and verse. It would be lovely to be able to understand. Someone said the first line. If you knew exactly where they were, that would be wonderful. So anyway, we are here for the Haftarah of Shemot, which today is broken up into, I think, 2 areas in Isaiah. And you'll read the chapters on the page right now. Okay, so we are in Isaiah 27, and we're starting at 6. And for any of you interested, we're using the version that's on Hebcal, and you'll find a link to that underneath the video.
And for those that want the full text in this, that's the JPS, the Jewish Publication Society translation, used with permission by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America.
In days to come, Jacob shall strike root, Israel shall sprout and blossom, and the face of the world shall be covered with fruit. Was he beaten as his beater has been? Did he suffer such slaughter as his slayers? Assailing them with fury unchained, his pitiless blast bore them off on a day of the gale. It's very poetic language there at the beginning.
Well, this is the book of Isaiah, and you're going to get beautiful poetry throughout.
Jacob being Israel in the first line there.
Exactly. Jacob as the stand-in for Israel as a whole, and talking about it in that parallel, a striking root, of sprouting, of blossoming, the growing.
Was he beaten as his beater has been? As confusing to read as it is to say. Who are they talking about in this instance? Is it anyone that's attacked Israel, or is it one specific group of people?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. So it's a general reference in the idea of the prophecy of the days to come. That when Jacob is firmly established again in a peace, we will look back on the enormity of history and say, despite all the horrible things that happened to Jacob, weren't those who attacked Jacob worse off at the end than Jacob was? That is to say, Jacob may have been beaten, but those who beat him were beaten worse. Eventually, of course, and the same with the regard with the suffering of the slaughterers.
Well, I remember, when I look at the news, and sometimes we were finishing the Torah portion up, or we were studying the Torah portion, and we're reading about the dynasty of the Pharaohs, and where are they? And the Phoenicians and the Assyrians and all these different groups and subgroups, and we have to ask, like, where are they? So it's good, it's warming to read a verse like that, and although it means the future, you can see that this isn't going to be a sudden revelation. It's a progressive thing.
It does take a long time throughout the course of history, unfortunately. Yes.
Assuredly, by this alone shall Jacob's sin be purged away. This is the only price for removing his guilt, that he make all the altar stones like shattered blocks of chalk, with no sacred post left standing, nor any incense altar. Thus fortified cities lie desolate, homesteads deserted, forsaken like a wilderness, where calves grazed, where they lay down and consumed its boughs. When its crown is withered, they break. Women come back and make fires with them, for they are a people without understanding. That is why their Maker will show them no mercy. Their Creator will deny them grace. So Israel, to nutshell it, Israel's sins will be purged if they remove all idolatry from the land.
Exactly. The altar stones, the blocks of chalk, the sacred posts, the incense, those are all references to different idolatrous practices.
On that day, the Lord will beat out the people like grain from the channel of the Euphrates to the Wadi of Egypt, and you shall be picked up one by one, the children of Israel. The Wadi of Egypt, are they talking about the Nile and the kind of the seasonal water of the Nile?
The Wadi of Egypt is a point of debate among commentators about whether or not that means the Nile Delta or whether it means one of the rivers that would flow seasonally in the Sinai, in the area between what is the Nile area and the border of Israel today. So it's basically an Egyptian reference, but we couldn't point to it on Google Maps with certainty.
Google's terrible, isn't it? Why do you bother?
But it's we got it within a couple hundred miles, so it's not too far off. No one's pointing to Morocco.
And in that day a great ram's horn shall be sounded, and all the strayed who are in the land of Assyria, and the expelled who are in the land of Egypt, shall come and worship the Lord on the holy mount in Jerusalem. Which reminds me, Isaiah 56 speaks about all the nations coming to the mountain of the Lord.
Right, and really this is the idea of the ingathering of the exiles. That Isaiah is saying that despite the fact that our people will be scattered to the extents of the world, which is what Euphrates and Egypt represent, it's as far to the east and as far to the west as you can imagine, that they will all come back. Picked one by one, that no one will be overlooked. It's also from this that we get a little bit of a parallel to the Torah portion, the idea that those who were down in Egypt, the sons of Jacob, the tribes that had been down in Egypt, that in this Torah portion are now turned into slaves, that there is the promise that they will be redeemed, that they will come out from Egypt. And really the exodus from Egypt becomes the archetype for the promise of future and global redemption. The way that we would say that if God could take us out of Egypt, then God can bring redemption to us at any time, and God can bring redemption to the world. It's proof of God's credentials.
I was thinking a little bit this week about that part of the Torah portion. So Jacob's gone down to Egypt to be with his son Joseph, and has taken the family, and they've kind of enrooted themselves now, and depending on who you ask, they're there for a certain number of hundreds of years, from 1 through to 4, depending on how you want to look at it. There must have been a very magnetic pull to keep people in Egypt for that long, especially on the other side of a famine, because we know that there's the 5 years of bad to come, but the rest of the time they were there, we have to wonder why they didn't leave. So I'm curious about the indentureship and the slavery of the people. Was this is the Jewish thought that this was like a full-on slavery and chains and whips and you're kept in boxes, or was there more of a kind of was there like a taxation reason that they were forced to stay, were they under guard? Because when we say slave, we instantly think of the Afro-Caribbeans that were put into slavery in the 17th and 1800s, and that's our picture of slavery. And I'm curious as to how close the Israelite slavery was to that image.
It wasn't as horrible and brutal as that slavery was, but it did still have the extent of slavery that they could murder the children that were born, the boys, and that was perfectly acceptable in the country. Although there's discussion of individuals who left at their own time, the nation as a whole was definitely under guard to not simply depart whenever they felt like it. And although the people had some freedom of possession, of relationship, of choosing who they would marry and such, they were not free to determine the path of their lives. So it wasn't as brutal and dehumanizing as the slavery that happened in the United States, but this was much more than just a harsh taxation system. This did have a status of chattel, just not quite entirely as it later came to be expressed in the Americas.
Chapter 28.
All right, before we go on to chapter 8, I just want to point out, if we had stopped there, it would have been a perfectly fine and reasonable Haftarah. That we would have stopped with this notion that, yes, we had done bad with idolatry, but eventually it'll be swept away, and we will return, and God will gather us all in. So we got to wonder why chapter 28 was put in. And then when we get to chapter 29, again, of why add in this extra. Chapter 28 is rough.
The proud crowns of the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is but wilted flowers. On the heads of men bloated with rich food, they are overcome by wine. It's not painting a very good picture of Ephraim.
No. And Ephraim here is again a stand-in for the northern kingdom of Israel, which was a more immediate adversary during the days of Isaiah, who lived primarily in the southern kingdom of Judah, and who prophesied more to the south, but he also talked about the north an awful lot, because the north was the one that was falling under the Assyrian assault. And he saw the north's failure as being indicative of what the south would face if they didn't change their behavior. And this notion of Ephraim, which was the richer, more successful, more powerful northern kingdom, as being a huge warning. So they may be drunk, they may be fat, they may have eaten all this wonderful stuff, meaning they were successful, but now their beauty is wilted, and they lie there bloated, ready to be overcome. And they are in fact overcome by the Assyrians.
Lo, my Lord has something strong and mighty, like a storm of hail, a shower of pestilence, something like a storm of massive torrential rain, shall be hurtled with force to the ground. Trampled underfoot shall be the proud crowns of the drunkards of Ephraim, the wilted flowers. On the heads of men bloated with rich food, that are his glorious beauty, they shall be like an early fig before the fruit harvest. Whoever sees it devours it, while it is still in the land.
Ephraim's going down. And they are going to be just trampled and plucked and squished, and they're gone. And really, this is giving vocalization to what happened at the end of chapter 27, where it had that rather strange line that it says, "Their Maker will show them no mercy; their Creator will deny them grace." That was in verse 11 at the end of 27. And here we see what that looks like when they are no longer being given a chance to turn, that this is what is coming, and they will be struck down in the most horrible and evil of ways. And we have to ask ourselves, well, why didn't God want to show them any mercy? I mean, what's happening here? And many of the commentators, most famously, or most recently, I should say, Rabbi Cook from Israel points out that sometimes mercy has to stop and justice will come to play. That if God continued to show the northern kingdom and then later the southern kingdom mercy infinitely, then there would never be any change, there would never be any justice. And as much as it pains us to realize, and certainly was not what God had desired for his world, the mercy that had been extended through the hundreds of years of their immorality had to come to an end, and justice had to take place. And that's what we're seeing, the repercussions here in the beginning of this chapter.
I had a small conversation with a few friends on Facebook just recently about free will, and if God knows everything, then do we ever get free will? And can we really make a free choice and a free decision if God already knows what we're going to do? How do we know that we're not walking along some predestined path? And it's too big a topic to talk about now, really, but that kind of highlights it. At what point, if we read that God will forgive if we repent, and that He's got no very long nostrils. But at what point does God say, no, you can't anymore? And I mean, there must have been a point even within that movement where a few of those people said, oh well, we've made a massive mistake, but it kept coming. There was like a definite end. There was nothing they could do. And I think that's quite difficult when we are kind of grown on the idea that God is ever forgiving and ever loving. That's quite a difficult pill to swallow, I think, that God sometimes says, no, that's enough. You can get forgiveness for your repentance, but sometimes the punishment's going to happen anyway.
Well, and it's probably really important to state here, because it also is important for understanding the plagues that happened to Egypt. That God's being ever loving and ever forgiving is not contradictory to the idea that God is also desirous of justice in the world. Because as any parent knows, continually indulging and spoiling a child is not a sign of greater love than one that disciplines a child in a way that helps them learn the right path to walk. And although God is clearly willing to forgive the individual and even forgive nations time and time again to give them a chance to learn and change, because punishment is not what is desired, a complete absence of discipline or of correction will lead only to further and further crimes. And that's what we begin to see here. It didn't have to be this way, but it did have to get fixed eventually.
In that day the Lord of hosts shall become like a crown of beauty and a diadem of glory for the remnant of his people, and a spirit of judgment for him who sits in judgment, and of valor for those who repel attacks at the gate. But those who are muddled by wine and dazed by liquor, priest and prophet are muddled by liquor. They are confused by wine. They are dazed by... There's a lot of drink here. They
Yes.
are dazed by liquor. They are muddled in their visions. They stumble in judgment. Yea, all tables are covered with vomit and filth, so that no space is left.
I told you this was a rough chapter.
It is a rough chapter. To whom would he give instruction? To whom expound a message? To those newly weaned from milk, just taken away from the breast, with the same mutter upon mutter, murmur upon murmur, now here, now there. So the part just at the end here is saying that there was no one who was able to even hear God, to hear a message, or to hear the prophet.
Exactly. The word there that gets translated as mutter and murmur is kav and sav and sav, which are really kind of onomatopoeia words derived from the word for measure, or line and line, and commandment and commandment, or order and order. And so the idea is that the people have become so drunk on their own crimes that, and filled their lives with this vomit and filth to such a point, there's no room left even for God to make an inroad to help them see the right path. The table has been filled. There is no room left for God, and so therefore the words of the prophets who are trying to tell them this is what you should do, they just sound like muttering. The prophets giving them instructions, kav, and sav, trying to, and they're just going blah, 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 blah. That's all they hear is blah, 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 do this, don't do that, go there, go there. And he's saying once they've even reached the age that they've been weaned from the breast, they've already become drunk on this filth. And there's no chance for me, the prophet speaking on behalf of God, to break the cycle of this drunkenness of their crimes. And it's going to have to be swept away before we can start again. It's a terribly depressing view of their society, that they had reached this point that they couldn't even hear instructions that were trying to help them. They had just driven God completely out. You know, there's a teaching from Pirkei Avot about that verse 8, where it says the tables are covered with vomit and filth, so that no space is left. And the phrase, excuse me, the word that's used for space is makom, which is in rabbinic literature another synonym for God. God is often called hamakom, the place. And so there's a very simple way of reading that, which is their tables are so covered with vomit and filth, there is no God. And Pirkei Avot uses that specifically in reverse to say that if God is not at your table, then it is as though you are eating from vomit and filth. That we must share words of Torah. We must make sure that even at our meal times that we are inviting God into our presence.
Truly, as one who speaks to that people in a stammering jargon and with an alien tongue, is he who declares to them, "This is the resting place, let the weary rest, for this is the place of repose." They refuse to listen. To them the word of the Lord is, mutter upon mutter, murmur upon murmur, now here, now there, and so they will march, but they will fall backwards and be injured and snared and captured. So it's a parallelism of the previous verse. It feels that they feel self-sufficient in all things.
They are happy in their drunkenness, yes. And that's a bit of the message that's also true for Egypt, and which will be emphasized much more strongly in next week's Haftarah from Ezekiel, talking about Pharaoh in particular. That sense of self-satisfaction, of self-sufficiency, can be very dangerous.
So we're skipping forward to chapter 29, verses 22 and 23.
Right, which is also surprising, but not quite surprising. I think we've discussed before in these classes, or in these sessions, that according to the traditions of how the Haftarah were chosen, we never finish a Haftarah on a negative verse.
We finish on a song.
And certainly verse 13 of 28 would not be a happy verse to finish on. And going all the way back, you'd have to go all the way up to like verse 5 before you could find anything that was anything at all positive. And so instead, the sages jumped us ahead to chapter 29 to try and make sure that we could finish on a positive note.
And verse 22, they really had to go forward quite a long way. So if you're at home, read the missing lines. Fill in the blanks.
As always.
Assuredly, thus said the Lord to the house of Jacob, who redeemed Abraham. No more shall Jacob be ashamed, no longer his face grow pale. For when he, that is his children, behold what my hands have wrought in his midst, they will hallow my name. Men will hallow the Holy One of Jacob, and will stand in awe of the God of Israel. It's a good finish.
So it will all work out eventually.
Yeah, it's not. I'm sure for the few who realized they were making a terrible mistake, that may not have given much comfort. It's interesting because we always, well, I say we, I count for myself, I suppose. I see my relationship with the Creator and I see other people's relationships with the Creator. But often when we look at these texts, we're not really, it doesn't seem to be individual souls. We're looking at one nation among other nations, and that they form a part of a body that's moving forward. So you kind of the Northern Kingdom is given a lesson to teach another people a lesson, even though they are the same people. And I don't think about the small people, that are suffering through this. I just think, yeah, go God, you show them. But yeah, but no, for someone who, like me, if I was there, I may have been one of those people that was getting drunk every morning, and it's kind of sobering to think about all the small parts that make up the whole, and how your small life choices can be part of a much bigger action. So there we are, everyone. That was this week's Haftarah Half Hour. And stick around till the end of the video and you'll find out what next week's recording will be about, so you can read through and swat up on that before we get involved. Leave your comments below. Don't forget to like and share and subscribe to this video on the channel. Thanks very much for joining us again, Rabbi Neely.
It's always my pleasure.
And we shall see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.